Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Unfollowing Mum. I am really excited to have a guest with me today. I am going to be speaking to Ben Cole-Edwards. Many of you might have come across his work over on TikTok. Ben runs the Trauma Corner over there, and I love what he does I love what he does. We've just discussed this before we started recording. Actually, if you love it, we're really sorry to hear that you love it, but equally, welcome to the community. But he talks a lot about narcissism, toxic parents, and people who have had that traumatic experience and moving through it. And I just find it so relatable, which sucks, but something that is really healing to know that there is a community out there and it's not an experience that I have gone through on my own, which is what I set this up for. So welcome, Ben.
Thank you. Again, thank you for having me. You just saying, before I introduce myself there, you're just saying that it sucks when it's relatable what I talk about and what we talk about, and it is. And this week, I was buying a greenhouse, and the woman stood next to me, kept like looking at me, and then she went, "Oh my God, you on TikTok?" And I jumped bright red, and I was like, "Yeah." So, and it's not as if I'm like doing something like I'm not a musician. I'm just talking about a bad childhood. And she was like, "You on TikTok?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she said, "Oh, I love your videos." And I was like, "Sorry." She was like, "I can relate to my parents." I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
don't know what to say." So yeah, I'm Ben Cole-Edwards, and I run Trauma Corner, that's on TikTok. So this started, I basically talk about what I went through as a child and my upbringing and how I do it differently now as a parent. And it started I created the TikTok account in January, and I called it something like Parenting 1 to 3, because I wanted to talk about parenting and any parenting advice I had. So I started by uploading videos that I had saved in my phone of my kids or of us on holiday, for example, and writing over the video. Like, you can take your kids on holiday, even though they won't remember, and it'll teach them this and things like that. And then I started talking about, and it wasn't even intentional. I started mentioning my upbringing, and I was talking about having emotionally unavailable or emotionally mature parents. And then I mentioned certain things which was taboo, where I'd say, if you had an emotionally unavailable or emotionally mature parent, they'd say things like, do you know how easy it'd be, this is my own experience, do you know how easy it'd be to throw myself in front of a car on the way to work? And I just mentioned that. I was kind of scared to mention it, but that wasn't really what the video was about. I just sort of added that as a side note. And so many people commented saying, "Oh, shit, me too." And I was like, oh, okay. So I started talking about it more. And then in February, I proposed up saying, "Thank you so much for 1,000 followers. Thank you. I'm sorry that you can relate, but I will keep doing videos to show you that you're not on your own." And then I think it's like 170 something thousand followers now, which I'm super, super blessed and grateful for. But how shit is it that so many people can relate to what we went through? But it's like you said, it's good to have this healing community and the people commenting help me. But it's good to have this community where we understand that it wasn't just us, and the environments that we grew up in weren't normal, but we were conditioned to believe that they were normal because our parents said things like, "Those kids over there have it worse," or "I sacrificed so much for you." And when we're kids, we just have no right to question if our parents are right or wrong. So when they say things like, "I'm a great mother, you should respect me," we think, "You're a great mother, I will respect you."
Yeah.
That's what they condition you to believe. And then when you're an adult and people are like, "Oh, you only had one meal a day?" I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean? I used to have this friend that, and I'm rambling here, but I used to have this friend that like some summers I would sleep over his house, he'd sleep over mine, I'd sleep over his, and it'd get to like 6, 7 o'clock in the night, and he's like, "Ben, can we have something to eat?" And I'm like, "Why?" And in my head I'm like, "Oh, you're so fat, you're so greedy."
Yeah.
But it was because I wasn't used to eating again. I would have food in the middle of the day, and then that was it. And then my mother would make fun of me for being skinny, but underfeed me, and then shout to me if I had more food. So, oh, it's nuts. I know I just tried to introduce myself and then went off on one, but yeah, that's me.
No, I think that I love that because it's the relatability of it. There will be so many people out there that are like, "Shit, yeah, that was my experience." And when I talk about experiences that I've had personally, I think that is when we find the most powerful moments. Because it's so easy to talk about it from, and I've spoken to countless psychologists, psychotherapists. I know you're a certified life coach, all these professionals who work with clients, but perhaps haven't experienced that themselves or aren't sharing it from their perspective. And as much as that professional is extremely valuable, extremely helpful, when you're actually talking about the lived experience, it's like a eureka moment. Because when I hear you talking about things, I'm like, yeah, no, I remember that. You said about your mum saying, oh, I could just throw myself under a bus. Do you know how easy that would be? I remember my mum telling me stories of how she was so depressed when she was young, when my parents first separated, that she would drink in the morning. And I remember in passing, because it's so normalized in your head, saying to a friend, oh yeah, no, I remember my mum had said to me once that she'd been into the bank, and I was only maybe, I'd probably have been about 10, or maybe a bit younger, maybe 9 or 8, and just chattering away, telling my friend. And she said, oh yeah, I went into the bank and I told the bank manager that I was thinking about killing myself, but I'd have to kill you too, because I couldn't leave you. Nobody would be there to love you the way I do.
Yeah.
And my friend just looked and went, she said what? And I was like, well, she was going through a really hard time and started excusing it. And she was like, that is many levels of fucked up.
Yeah.
And what's worse is the fact that nobody flagged it and nobody came to help. Like, I'm so sorry you experienced that. And I was quite shocked. And I'll do these things where I'll say to my husband something that I'm talking about in conversation or in passing, like it's not a big deal. And actually, it's really bad. But it's so normalized in your head. So when you hear other people talking about it and saying, actually, I've come to realize this was really fucked up. Have you come to realize it was really fucked up? And how can we not do this with our kids? I think it's really powerful.
I've had family members because obviously since I started making these TikTok videos, I've had family members say, oh, I wish you would come to me, or why didn't you tell me this was happening? But you were conditioned to believe that's normality.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't know any different. And I just want to touch on when you were saying that these professions talking to people, and I had my life coaching qualification, means nothing. I paid like £25 and done an online course like 2 or 3 years ago, just so I'd look better having that title. But everything I speak about is experience. Whereas, and again, like you said, not knocking any professions, but a lot of the time my clients will say that when they go to certain professions, I'll say that the advice they get is being recited from a book.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like they're being put into a box, like you fit this category. Whereas when people speak to me and you, and they say, I went through this, and you're like, yeah, me too. Here's how we overcome it. And when I was just saying about my mother there, when I created the account, I didn't put my name on it, didn't sync my contacts, didn't link it to my socials, because part of me again didn't want to hurt your feelings. So I think half of my followers are in America, so no one knows her anyway. I never mentioned her name. We have different surnames anyway. And then one day, my next door neighbor's son came out of the house, and he was like, "Oh, my missus been watching your videos." I was like, "Oh shit!" And then I had no idea. I've never used TikTok. I didn't know that like the algorithm works. Sometimes it comes up locally, and people who live locally to you will come up. And then people in my area were following and commenting and joining the lives, and I was like, "Oh shit!" And my mother was still coming back and forth my house, and then I had a phone call off her. I'm just letting you know, I've seen your videos of you slagging me off. That's it now, we're done. And then that was 2 months ago. I haven't heard of her since. She haven't asked about her grandkids. The only sort of contact I've had is when she phoned the police because my TikToks were causing her distress. So they had to ring me. So hey ho.
Do you know, I find, because we had it was totally different. We had a different encounter with police. And I wonder if anybody listening has had similar experiences when they've had to deal with the police because of an abusive or toxic parent. Because in our situation, my mum was actually showing up at my eldest school after, well, it was all their school because they were all at primary school at the time, but she was showing up specifically to speak to him as he'd walked down the hill after school. And this was shortly after our estrangement. So for context, for anyone listening who doesn't know him, for yourself, Ben, my mum lived with us. We built her an annex, and I had to ask her to leave because it became so toxic. Offered to make sure that she would be able to afford a house, all of the rest of it, buy all that for her. And she went through legal proceedings to try and dig her heels in and stay, even though she declared many a time how unhappy she was living there. She just wanted the control over me and over our relationship. And that was the last straw, really. That was when we cut contact, and that was about 3 years ago. And I can say my life is so much happier and calmer without her in it. Like, she did a real number on my relationship, with my kids, on my kids, and she really zoned in on my eldest. So after she'd showed up at school and she'd enlisted the help of another grandparent to arrange a secret meeting with my eldest, who was 9 at the time.
Wow.
And she told him, do not tell mummy and daddy. I will be here again tomorrow and I will be able to see you. I miss you and I love you, and they're keeping me from you. And she'd sort of beckoned him across the road to come to the car and all sorts. So we ended up calling the police, because obviously that's not going to fly. It's harassment for one, but also it scared the living shit out of him. And for him to be 9 and usher his brother and sister to the opposite side of the road because he didn't want them to be frightened, that speaks volumes of how he felt in that situation, and is really sad and toxic. And my experience with the police was, for a start, it was very lackadaisical. No child had actually been kidnapped, and I appreciate they've got lots of very important things to deal with. So they weren't particularly speedy about it, but hey, they're understaffed. I get that. However, when they did eventually get round to going and speaking to her about 3 weeks later, they came back to us and said, look, she looks like a really nice old lady. I mean, you knew where it was going, didn't you? Let's be honest. But it baffled me.
Narcissists are very good of telling new people who they want to be and putting this mask on. So like when the police officer, I'm laughing, the police officer rang me and he said, look, I can't make you take these videos down, but it's obviously causing you massive distress, and when you're older your feelings are going to change. I'm like, you don't know him. That's not how it works. But because our parents teach us that they live perception first. So when you're in the house, there is no real relationship. You don't feel like parents. They just feel like blood relatives that live with you. And then when you're out, they think they're the best parents, and they tell other people how proud of you they are. And it doesn't make sense because they're not like that at home. Yeah. So they're very, very good at, as soon as they open the door, they think, what mask should I put on today? I'll be the best mother. Awesome. And then when they go to when the police went to your mother's house and she's like, I just want to see my kids, they kicked me out of their house.
Yeah.
After everything I sacrificed for them. And the police is like, oh, I feel so bad for Solomon.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. And I feel like I've experienced, talking about it online, there is this real defensiveness over parents, regardless of whether they're strangers or not. Because let's be completely frank, you've got kids, I've got kids. We all know it's really hard. It can be really tough at times. It can be draining. And especially if you don't have that blueprint of healthy parenting, my God, can it be a challenge? And every so often I will be like, shit, I've popped up as my mum there. I'm going to have to build a repair with my kids here because that wasn't acceptable behavior. Or I need to think about how I acted and have a conversation with them about why that triggered me so much. And obviously in an age appropriate way. I'm not sitting a 5-year-old down and being like, darling, this triggered me. But I think it's really important to look at how society excuses, especially older parents, for their behavior. And, you know, if you were to talk about some of the things that you have experienced in the context of a spousal relationship, you were to talk about it in the context of friendship, even potentially in the context of siblings, it would be, oh my goodness, don't have contact with that person. That's terrible. You should protect yourself from that. You deserve better. But when it's a parent, and we only get one mum, it's your mum. You only get one mum.
People who say you've only got one mum have never experienced it. So they see it as disrespect or strange. They're like, how can you treat your mother like that? But no one questions how they could treat you like that. So I put these videos up, right? Sorry to cut you off there.
No.
I put videos up to say, this is what I went through. And every kind of bad every kind of bad behavior under the sun from a parent. But then my family members saw this and sent them to my mother and said they were disgusted with me. Not disgusted with the behavior, or how my mother didn't let me go to Disneyland the day before because someone on the same bus was dating my father. And I was supposed to go with my grandmother. The toxic behavior. And then my 99% of my mother's side of the family don't speak to me now because of the videos, without watching them, without questioning what they're about, and without coming to me either. So especially when there's so many narcissists in one family, they sort of they are happy to all point the finger at the same person and say, any issue we have is because of you, and we are happy now because you made us unhappy. So they can gang up and triangulate with each other.
Yeah, and you very much become the scapegoat. And what I find is that the person who is the scapegoat, everyone else will quite happily pile on to them, because you need to stay in that either invisible or golden role. And you see it all the time amongst siblings. And my mum tried very much to do it with my children, where one child would be out of favour. And that one, I have 3. And it would be, oh, well, we don't like that one today. And I'm an only child. So growing up as an only child, I was very much... I fitted into the different roles that she needed, dependent on whatever she wanted, how compliant I was, or any of these things. And it's really difficult to be that scapegoat, to be the one that speaks out and goes, actually, do you know what? This wasn't acceptable. This wasn't acceptable on any level. And I think what really baffles me is that the people that I speak to, the only thing that any of them have ever wanted is a bit of accountability for the behavior, a bit of, I'm really sorry that was the way that I behaved. Actually, I was in a really bad place, and that doesn't excuse it. I wasn't the mother that you needed. I wasn't the mother that I should have been, and I certainly wasn't the mother that I wanted to be. But, I see how this has hurt you. And I'm going to do better now, and let's repair this relationship, because I've definitely got to take some of the fault here, if not all of it, and the majority of it. You were a child, and
not going to happen.
No, and it just doesn't happen. And this is what baffles me, because if my kids came to me and said, Mummy, what you've done there, even at this small age, has really upset me. At minimum, even if it might be over a chocolate biscuit, but at minimum, I validate them and say to them, I get that you're really frustrated there. However, this is why, and give them an explanation. I sit with adult behavior, but when you have an emotionally immature parent, it's physically impossible. And if you have a narcissistic parent, it's just never going to happen, because the thought of them being accountable for anything is just outlandish.
I think what happens is, and again, loads of people say, they comment, not just on my videos, but everywhere else, is how do I deal with being the black sheep in a toxic family? And that sentence alone is a compliment. To have a toxic family and being the black sheep, the one that sticks out of a toxic family, is a compliment.
Yes.
That's the best thing your parents have ever told you. But I think what happens with like narcissistic parents is, because a lot of them are just like 15-year-old girls living in 60-year-old bodies, because when they have this one event that should force them to mature and to grow, instead they put a wall up and say, I am the victim. And now, because everything I do now has an excuse because of this one event. So if you had a bad mother, and she would say, I am the way I am because I had a bad mother, which means that your mother and you both have an awareness of what bad parenting is, but you choose to act on it, and your mother does not. Your mother, loads of people's mothers and fathers, of course, will say, because of that event, I do this. And like what happens is, I notice you do it too, but you had awareness of it, is our parents condition us in childhood to make excuses for them. So like you just said, when you spoke to your friend about your mother going to the bank, you said, yeah, but she was going through a bad time, which doesn't excuse it. But because we are so used to our parents making excuses, we make them too.
Yeah. And you're raised to believe that you should be almost like a defender, or I certainly was anyway. And there was always this, even now, and I work on this when I do therapy, even now, there is almost this sense of betrayal. And you said it yourself then with, I didn't put my name out there. I didn't do this because I didn't want to hurt her.
Yeah.
And there's that sense that you are supposed to protect them, you are supposed to defend them. And we've spoken to people before on the podcast who have had alcoholic parents, who've had physically abusive parents as well, who've had parents who are abusing drugs. And every time they've said the same thing. Well, I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want to get them into trouble. I didn't tell anyone because I had to protect them. I didn't talk about how bad it was because I knew if I did, that maybe she'd get into trouble, he'd get into trouble, I'd be taken away. It's that conditioning of, we have to protect them, we have to be on their side. And for me, it was very much just me and my mum against my dad, who had moved out. And it was a real sense of companionship and enmeshment. Enmeshment's
Yeah.
a better word for it, which was really difficult. Was for you, was it just you and your mum, or was it you, your mum and your dad? Do you have any siblings?
So my father left when I was 2. He was 18 when I was conceived. He left when I was 2. I'd see him like once a year, but he was alcoholic, and I had a better relationship with him when I was from about 18. So I remember he came to see me once, and I think I was 17, and he said, "Can I have a hug?" And I said, "No." And I said, and it was probably the first time I've spoken up, because I was always afraid of my father. And I said, "You weren't there when I needed you, and now I don't need you." And then stormed off. And then I saw him, and I lived with him for a bit, and we had a better relationship. And he passed away in 2020. So it was me and my mother, and then she met another man and had my sister when I was 5. And then they split up. So it was me, my mother, and my sister. My father went on to have another 2 kids with 2 different women. So I got 3 siblings. None of them were the same set of parents. So we all have different experiences of the parents as well. Completely different. Again, I relate to you where you said that when my father left and obviously moved out, all the images I had of my father, mental images, would be negative. Not because I remember them, but because my mother instilled them into my brain. This is what your father was like, and all this. And I remember once, because especially as a boy, I craved a father and son relationship. So I remember texting him once, and I said, "If you stop drinking, can I come and live with you?" And I told my mother, and I said, "Oh, Daddy's texted me and said, if he stops drinking, can I go live with him?" And then it was him, not me. And then she said, "What did you say?" And I was like, "Oh," I said, "I'd think about it." Oh, she kicked off. "After all I've sacrificed for you." But she didn't see as a child as craving that father figure. So what happens a lot, I'm not sure if it happened to you, but we attach ourselves to other parental figures. So male teachers, my friends' fathers, because I just wanted to be that perfect child to a father. I remember once I was in school, and I was in year 7, and my teacher had the same surname as me. And he said, "Oh, I'm the same age as your mother. Wow, I could be your father." And I was, "Don't do that." Don't do that. You attach yourself because we are conditioned to be people pleasers as well, because our parents are only borderline nice to us when we're in their good books and doing things to benefit them. And if we have problems or stress, we're just a fucking burden. Because we're a people pleaser, we try and please other people to live up and be the perfect child to them too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah, no, I completely relate to that. I really do. I remember. And it's funny, actually, because for me, it almost wasn't the male teachers. I think, and I don't know, again, if this is because I'm a woman or girl at the time, I would crave a different kind of attention, I think, from male figures, which, and we're calling out the daddy issues. But I think that for me, that would have been, especially in my teen years, that would have been the route that I would have taken there, looking at older men as potential partners, which, is really dangerous and really soul destroying for a young girl who's craving that male attention and looking for it in the wrong ways. It opens you up to predators, and it was a really difficult situation to be in. I got married at 18, very much encouraged by my mother, to a man who was 10 years my senior, who had met me when I was 15. Like, this dude used to pick me up from school. And that as a 34-year-old now, that is creepy on very many levels. Yeah. And yet it was the best thing in the world when I was growing up. But I very much feel like I latched on to female teachers and that kind of thing as that maternal figure. And I would almost always have one or two that I would feel really close to and want to spend all my time with. Probably in the art department, actually. I think I've joked with somebody on here before that the majority of the kids that were traumatized did some form of art or graphic design or something along those lines. It was where you're nodding, did you?
Yes, I done acting in uni.
There you go. There you go. It's
I tell you what, right?
In there.
I was the only person in my entire year to do music, art, and drama.
Really? Oh, goodness me. I think it's so funny how so many of us seem to have these correlations. And I don't know if it's just because we found empathy in those teachers that were perhaps saw something there that we needed.
Maybe that's the only subjects we could express our true selves in.
Quite possibly. Like art, I really loved. And I remember being really fixated on Salvador Dali and surrealism, and I loved it. And actually looking at the psychology behind that's a bit of escapism, isn't it? That's looking for something that's totally different. And also surrealism could be quite dark in ways, and I would be drawn to that. So I think that's quite interesting, looking at it from that point of view. I wonder how many of us actually truly do correlate to that. I'll probably get an influx of messages after this episode goes out of people going, me, it's me.
When I done acting in uni, and when you portray a character and you can be whoever the fuck you want to be. You'll get rid of your trauma, whatever's going on, and you go on stage and be whoever you want and just embody that person and forget about everything else.
Exactly. It's sad in a way, but it was a release. And I think what you crave when you have that toxic family and you're not getting that safety at home is that release, and you're looking for it wherever you can find it, which it is difficult for so many people. And it's sad when you think about it, but I think any way in which you can find that release is helpful at that stage in your life. At that stage in your life, that's a necessity. So you mentioned that you are now estranged from your mum.
Yes.
And you don't have contact with her now. Have you found not having contact with her to be a weight off your shoulders? Or have you found that it's been a complicated road?
So my mother and I have never had the best relationship. She's always felt like a troubled older sister. And where I live, before I had kids, I got a nearly 2.5-year-old and a 10-month-old. And she would park, before I had kids, she would park outside my house without an inch of exaggeration. She'd park outside my house, visit her mother, who lives 6 doors that way, visit her sister, who lives that way, get back in the car and drive off. And then when I had kids, she started coming in more. But in 2020, I went through a lot of trauma. And then to overcome that, I went through a sort of spiritual awakening and had a greater awareness. So when I had kids, I was in a good frame of mind. Whereas just before, like when my wife was pregnant, I was not. So my mother would come here, and again, I would let her come here. I would not visit her. I would not go there, let her come in the house if she wanted to see the grandkids, fine. She would never ask about me, and I made a point for, I think it was nearly 2 years straight. Every time her and her mother would come into the house, I would say, how are you? And she would answer, but not ask me. And I would make a point every single time. And I would start speaking about things that I was doing in my life, and she would look away, and I would stop. And then when I would see her grandparent in a way that she used to parent, I'd have to stop her. So she'd take my daughter's dolls and she'd say, this is mine, to get my daughter to cry. And then she would give it back and she'd say, this is mine. Or my daughter loved playing with my sister. My sister's 22. And then my mother would say, right, come on, we're going now. And call my sister. We're going now, even though they weren't. My daughter would be like, no. Just to wind her up. And I was like, yeah, don't do that. That's emotional abuse. You're being nasty to her for your own entertainment. Yeah. Don't do that. So our relationship was never the best. And every time I'd get a text, are you in? I'd be like, right, we got to clean the house because I'm going to get fucking judged. What are they going to say? I'm just going to be like a ball of tension, waiting for her to say something. And a lot of times she would have a go at me and then act like nothing ever happened. And then we've argued many times over the years and not spoken in months. But this time she found my videos and kept contact with me. It was the first time she'd done it to me. And then it felt really strange because the idea of no contact is never seeing your parents again, as though they had died. So it feels like grief when you first stop speaking to a parent because you're like, what now? That's it. I have no parents. And then my wife said to me, what are you missing out on? I was like, oh yeah, shit, absolutely nothing. Because she was never there for me, never supportive, always waiting to pick out the bad things. So like I won't get much into it. I have an app-based taxi business. It's like Uber, but it's designed around the safety of women. And we do things there that like, we have free period pads in the back of vehicles for women. And then I mentioned that, my mother's like, that's a bad idea. I'm like, no, fucking not. And I'm like, if you think it is, give me reasons. But it's just negativity. They just say things to hurt you.
Yeah.
So when I first stopped the contact, when she first stopped the contact, it felt strange for about 2 days, and then it was tension because all my entire family tree, because I were in like a 10-minute drive. And then as time went on, there was more peace because I knew that until the fucking police phoned me. But I knew when family try and call me out, I was like, if I've done one thing wrong, tell me. If I have exaggerated slightly or I've lied, tell me. if I've done one thing wrong, I am mature enough to hold my hand up and say, I've done this wrong. I'm sorry. I will change, which is my mother's issue.
Yeah.
Where they are always the victim, and they've always had it worse. So a great example is one of the last arguments my mother and I had is, so 2020, I found my grandfather dead, who was like my father, and I was her father. And then I had really bad flashbacks. And then 5 months later, when they stopped, my father died. And he was 44, had a heart attack. We weren't speaking, didn't tell him that we was having a baby. And then my mother phoned me screaming one day because I had got my father's father £20 for his birthday, but my mother's mother £10, like a week apart, right? She phoned me screaming, you need to start respecting my parents, Ben, because I've only got one. I was like, that's the only thing we got in common. Me too. What the fuck do you mean?
Yeah.
And then I was like, have a good day, and hang up. And then the next day she came in the house, didn't even say a word. She just smiling and talking to my kids. And I think they do that because they have a moment of reflection, maybe fucking millisecond, where they think, I shouldn't have said that. I'll just pretend it didn't happen instead of apologizing.
Yeah,
So,
sorry, I was just going to say that I read Danny Morrigan's book, which is very much aimed at daughters of narcissistic mothers. And I want to touch on that with you in a minute, because I think there's an awful lot more out there for daughters of narcissistic mothers than there is for sons of narcissistic mothers. But this book in particular, she talks about the narcissistic U-turn and how they will rage, full narcissistic rage, screaming, shouting, name calling, some truly horrific things that they will come out with. And then next minute, best friend. And my mum used to do that consistently. So when I would get when my mum would be really angry and I would get this narcissistic rage blow up, 2 or 3 minutes later, she would come through and what do you want for dinner? And it was so confusing. And it's a tactic that is used because then if you do call them out on their rage, it's, what are you talking about? I'm not sulking. I'm not doing this. What are you talking about? You're just being dramatic. It wasn't that bad. I'm not angry now. You're carrying it on. And I used to get that so much from my mother of, you're carrying it on. And just as if it had never happened. You know, it could be really spiteful and then as if it had never happened. And it's so discombobulating.
sometimes if they don't do that, they will add silent treatment in the middle.
Yes.
Where they will self-reflect, where they will scream at you, and all these things they know will hurt you. They will say, even if it's not relevant to the argument, they will use those things. Then they will go silent treatment, where they want you to reflect on your behavior, but deep down they're like, maybe I shouldn't have said that, but fuck it, I'm the victim. Then they will change it and say, what do you want for tea? And the key word you said there was, it's confusing, but it sticks with us because the one fucking role model in our life, sorry for swearing, the one role model in our life that is supposed to teach us how to regulate our emotions, how to navigate through our feelings, are confusing us. And again, when we're children, we can't question if our parents are right or wrong. They have to be right, and that's the way. So we just absorb it. And then when we're adults, when we get into relationships, we are confused how to talk through emotions because our parents taught us how not to.
Yeah, exactly. It's completely that. And you mentioned the silent treatment there. Silent treatment for me is actually one of the biggest punishments, because when I really made my mum angry, we would have the narcissistic rage. And then I could almost handle if she just flipped it off, and I could almost rationalize them. Oh, right, okay, she's just really cool. She just doesn't sulk. But when she was really, really, really angry, especially if it was something involving my dad, there could be days of hardly being spoken to at all. And she used to come out with a really nice phrase of, that's it, that's me and you, done. But I would be maybe like 4. And I look at my little children now and think, I can't imagine saying to them, that's it, that's me and you, done, and frightening them. And not only that, they have 2 parents who love them very much. I had one who was completely absent and one who was quite neglectful. And then I had my mother who was turning around to me and saying, that's it, that's me and you, done. I mean, that is so cruel to do to a child in that position who's already been abandoned by one parent. It's almost like threatening to them, well, you've stepped out of line a bit too much this time. So, and we're not talking about a teenager who's stropped or anything like that, although it certainly carried on through those years. This was a very, very young child who would just not be spoken to for a couple of days from their only caregiver. And it just is so baffling to me. And I think perhaps she did reflect in that time. But again, it's as you say, it's, oh, well, never mind, I'm the victim.
Yeah.
I'm the
And when
victim.
we have the silent treatment, it's a lot of time when you're an adult and you're in a relationship and your partner gives you a silent treatment, even if they are in the wrong, you have to apologize or you have to make up, because of that tension silent treatment brings, reminds you of your childhood. And it's awful. And again, like you said, that you was 4 and you couldn't imagine doing that to your kids. A lot of time we think we're healed and we still think our childhood is normal because we locked it away. And then we have kids and then we have moments like that and we think, oh shit, it lets our childhood trauma resurface.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
you hold a baby and you think, how did my parents do this? And like, for example, I'm not making excuses, but my father had his issues. He was 19 and he was alcoholic. So when he left, I was my daughter's age. And I could probably cry if I think about it too much, imagining how my daughter would feel seeing me and experiencing me every single day to then nothing.
Yeah.
How confusing is that, stripping one of your parents away from a child and that's it? My father just walked out, which is baffling. So yeah, it's a lot of time it takes becoming a parent yourself to look back at your childhood and think, how the fuck was I put through that?
It does. And there is so much childhood trauma that resurfaces when you become a parent, because things that you've otherwise passed off. And if you hear people talk about their experience, you're like, God, that was awful. But you're literally saying the same things and will think, oh, yeah, but she had. Oh, yeah, but they did. And you'll make excuses for them, or you'll say, oh, well, I was naughty. You'll internalize it just like that child did all those years ago. But it takes sometimes becoming a parent and wanting to change that childhood trauma, or wanting to work on that childhood trauma so that you don't repeat the cycle for your own children. And that really was the big clincher for me to start seeing how toxic my mother was when I started having children and started thinking, oh God, I just wouldn't do this to them. Actually, I wouldn't have done that to them, and I'm not going to let you do that to them. And it's funny you mentioned seeing your mum do things to your daughter that you remember being upsetting for you. I saw how my mum was reacting with my eldest child and was like, no, I'm not having that. No, I don't like that. And I
Yeah, but
often,
you should be proud of that,
yeah.
because the easy way out for you and I is being bad people and bad parents. And when our kids need therapy in 20 years, they will say, my mother's a bad mother, my father's a bad father, because their parents was a bad father. Their parents are bad parents. And no one tells you, but you should be proud of having the awareness and saying, I don't want my kids to go through what I went through. I'm not sure if you saw a video that I done just saying about how childhood trauma resurfaces, where my daughter headbutted me on accident. She like jumped up on the sofa and fell into me.
Oh,
And I
we've
said,
all
ow.
been there.
I said, ow. And she said, sorry, sorry, sorry. And I said, it was the first time she had apologized with intention. And as soon as she said it, my heart just dropped. And I said to my wife, I hope she's not afraid of me. And she was like, why on earth would she be afraid of you? She's just saying sorry because she headbutted you. But in my head, if I ever accidentally, in my past rather, if I ever accidentally hurt my parents, I would have to say sorry 1,000 times and run away. Otherwise, I'm going to get hit. So I'd say sorry, 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 and run. So as soon as my daughter hit me, I said, ow, ow, ow. And she said, sorry, sorry. I was like, she's waiting for me to shout her, waiting for me to hit her, which I don't do. My wife was like, you've never hit her. Why is she going to be afraid of you? And it's just another thing where you think you're healed and it just pops back up.
Yeah. I don't think we're ever actually healed, job done, tick. I think we will always and forever. And this goes for whether or not you've had that healthy dynamic or whether or not you've had a traumatic experience. I think we will forever be working on those inner wounds, be it the inner child, be it our mother wound, father wound. I think we'll always work on those things that, whether unintentionally in a perfectly healthy dynamic, is just something that's stuck with us, or whether fully intentionally in a toxic dynamic, or unintentionally in a toxic dynamic, I guess, because I appreciate that it can be unintentional. But it's something that I think we'll always work on. It's something that I think you're never just job done, tick. There will always be triggers that will remind you of something from your past. And there will always be something that pulls something up and makes you go, oh, hey, I don't want to repeat that cycle, or I don't want to do that. I'm going to do this differently. And that's okay. That's not something to fear or to feel like you're failing if you don't feel like you're fully healed. And I think there is this misconception that you will be at some point, just job done, tick, completed it. And that's it.
Yeah, it's a continuous process.
It is. It's very much a continuous process. I did want to speak to you, and I've just touched on it briefly. The majority of people that I have had on this podcast have been women. And I do feel that you're smiling. I do feel that there is far less men who talk about or perhaps acknowledge, you might feel differently if you've worked with clients or yourself through your own experiences, their experience with a toxic mother, perhaps with a difficult father. And I use the word difficult because that's the one that I hear a lot of men will use, or he was a bit of a dickhead or something along those lines. But there seems to be, and I know there's a real stigma around male mental health. And I think there seems to be a real disparity between the information out there for daughters of narcissistic mothers and the information out there for sons of narcissistic mothers or toxic mothers or in toxic dynamics. Do you feel that's accurate?
100%. I think that if you're going to write a book about narcissistic and toxic parents of children as well, you would say daughters, because that's the audience. Men are not going to read about it. Men are not going to acknowledge that they need the help, because again, there's a stigma around it. I deal with clients every day, and I've had, since I started doing this, 3 male clients. And that seems like a lot, because I get a lot of messages saying I should speak up about this, or I struggle to talk about it. Maybe I'll book a session in the future. And I try and encourage them. But men don't speak about it, because in society, a lot of men act like cavemen, where they say, we haven't got issues, we'll just fight through them and be strong, and oh yeah, our mothers, haha, and we'll go to the pub and we'll just drink throughout our troubles, and we'll just watch sports and get drunk and forget about it, instead of talking about it, because they think that's weak. But talking of real strength is talking about what you're going through to fix it, to be a better person. Instead of saying, yeah, I had a bad upbringing, talk through it. You had a manipulative upbringing because of this, and it's affected you because of this. Talking about what we go through gives us strength to be better people. And what men think is the opposite. Men think that putting this wall up and putting on a fake brave face and saying that what happened to me doesn't affect me, that's not strength. 99% of the people I talk to are women, because women are more open to talking about it, I guess. Which is why I guess I like talking about it, because it's breaking the stigma and just letting men know that it's okay to talk. It's more than okay to talk. It's what's needed. That's how we mature, and just getting our words out there and getting our thoughts on paper.
It's really important, I think. And I've said a number of times that I would love to speak to more men on this podcast, but I find it quite difficult to find men who do talk about childhood trauma, who do talk about the experiences they've had and how it affects them, because I think it does affect men and women differently, because we're in different cultural circumstances, or we're in different societal circumstances. As you say, mental health for men is very stigmatized still. It's why we have such high suicide rates. It's why we have so many problems. And it's really difficult to find men who are willing to open up and talk about their experiences, especially with a mother. And there's the kind of running stereotype of a mummy's boy. And yet there are so many men out there who that couldn't be further from the truth, or they grew up being a mummy's boy, as the saying goes, but actually what they were was enmeshed and emotionally abused.
Yeah, and they were just told that they were mummy's boys and believed it.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually get quite a lot of wives reaching out to me who say, my husband is listening to the podcast. My husband relates so much to the podcast, and we discuss it privately because we have that open communication within our relationship. And he said to me that it's okay to let you know that he's doing this, or perhaps she hasn't spoken to him about it. And I just wondered if you could have any men on the podcast. And it's like, I would love to, but finding people who are opening up about childhood trauma and the childhood trauma that men face from narcissistic mothers is really challenging, because there's not as much support out there.
A lot of, I put a video up to say that I'd had my first male client, just to encourage more men to speak about it. And you said about having a narcissistic mother, and then people saying that their father was just the dickhead, for example. What I find a lot of the time is the father is just the enabler, and whatever the mother does, the father goes along with. And I think it's for many reasons, but a lot of the time it's because again, where we go wrong as a society is we link age with maturity, whereas age literally, factually, scientifically means however many times you've gone around the sun, right? So I'm 27. All it means I've gone around the sun 27 times, unless you think the Earth's flat, right? So what we have a lot of times, our parents are boys and girls that haven't evolved and haven't matured, and just their bodies grew and their minds didn't. So a lot of time we have men, fathers, who their wife does all the cooking and cleaning and washing, and every single thing in the house. So they know that if they speak up against their wife, they're not going to get fed because they've been mothered, they've been babied by their wives. So if their wife does something to their child that they doesn't agree with, they're not going to say anything. Or they will, if they do speak up, they will say in private, "You know what she's like."
Yes. Oh, yes. The amount of people that say that.
With you. But yeah, they're just afraid because a lot of the time it's, especially this is more true for like stepfathers, where your mother's a narcissist, emotionally unavailable, and manipulative. But when she meets this new person, he believes that she is this fake face she's putting on. So he falls into it because he can't see through the bullshit like you can.
Yeah.
So yeah,
very much so. And I speak to a lot of people who had perhaps one parent who was narcissistic and toxic, and the other parent was the enabler.
Yeah.
So common in that dynamic. And there's almost that resentment of, but why didn't you stand up for me? Like I'm sure you do it with your partner, and my partner and I will sometimes step back to each other and be like, hello, red flag. That wasn't cool. That we fucked up there. That was, you shouldn't have spoken to them like that. I think you need to go and have a word. Or there'll be kind of that flag in the background that you're waving, like, calm down. I could see you're about to get really pissed off with them, and you check each
that's
other.
good parenting. And people, you just think that's your normal style of parenting. That's fucking really good parenting. And not many people parent like that.
Do you
so like
think?
if I say something, no, not many people at all. But you just think, right, maybe you're trying, I'm not trying to get in your head, right? Maybe you're trying really hard to be the opposite of your mother by thinking what you're doing now is normal parenting, but it's fucking really good. And I like to think I'm there too, right? So if I say something like, I'm trying to get my daughter wants to go to the park, but she hasn't got her hair done or something, I'll say, you have to do this, otherwise you can't do this, which is bad parenting. My wife will go, blackmailing, are we? And we'll just drop little hints like that. So we correct each other on our parenting and help each other be better parents. Whereas I used to work in a supermarket, right? And the amount of parenting I saw, where I remember one mother, she was like, said to her two girls, just because I'm your mother doesn't mean I have to love you. The parenting style you and I use, and I'm guessing everyone listening uses because they're on the same path, is conscious and great parenting, and everyone should be proud of ourselves because your parents never told you that they were proud of you, and they would never tell you that you were a good parent because it would take away from what they were as a parent. So I'm telling you, you should be proud of the way you parent, you and your husband or partner, sorry if you're not married. You should be so proud of the way you parenting because you're going to raise emotionally mature kids in the way that you wasn't raised.
Thank you. And to you. And to you. I think it's really difficult to feel that sense of pride for yourself. I mean, my mum did used to say, I think you're a brilliant mother, but it'd be coupled with a backhanded compliment, or it'd be coupled with, I think you're a brilliant mother. I just think you do this. So it was more covert and more sneaky.
And we are homeschooling. So whenever we have everything would be backhanded, right? And people would just be nasty just because we're homeschooling. I won't get into too much, but like when I first introduced the idea to the family, and I was like, we're going to homeschool, many, many different reasons. And I said, I think in about 30 or 40 years, school will be obsolete. And a family member said, nothing's going to be obsolete. That is the only, you'll be nasty, but you don't know what you were saying. Nothing is going to be obsolete. Does not make sense. You'll just be nasty because you don't agree with what I'm saying.
That is madness. Everything comes in cycles, I think. And yeah, of course, there are going to be things that are obsolete. And I actually think that there will be massive changes within schooling systems and within how we school, how we teach children. We've seen that purely through the pandemic. My son's school is done almost 100% via technology. So he has his iPad, most of his schoolwork's done on there. 5, 10 years ago, that was unheard of. It would all be pen and paper, sit down with your textbooks. So things do change. And you are right, people will quite often just be nasty for the sake of being nasty. And that in itself, I think, is a sign of their own immaturity and their own insecurity. Yeah. You have been so insightful. And I'm really, really grateful for you coming onto the podcast to chat to us today. Can you let people know where they can find you? And also, you have a book as well?
Of course, yeah. Again, thank you for having me. I love speaking about and love helping. And thank you for allowing me here to speak to people, speak to you and speak to people listening. Thank you so much. TikTok's my main channel. It's Ben Cole Edwards. Or just search Ben Trauma Corner, and it's the same for YouTube and Instagram, which I've just started both of those. I have a book which I have here. It's called Fuck Your Ego. How to Appreciate Each Moment, Switch Off Autopilot, and Question Reality Itself. I wrote this 2 years ago, and it's just about, so like when you drive down a road and you get to the end, you think, oh shit, I can't remember driving down this road. Was that light even green? People live life like that. So the book is just little techniques on its spirituality and mindset and how to question what you do every day just to live a better life, be more present. Yeah.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you so much for coming on. And guys, thank you for listening. I will speak to you again next week. Bye.